There's been a lot of worry talk about global warming, climate change, peak oil, angry political discourse, gridlock, America's declining competitiveness, the general coarsening of public behavior and popular culture, and other symptoms of environmental and cultural turmoil. At the same time, we are engulfed in an homogeneous commercial environment controlled by global interests, so that the very idea of localism, that the places where we live have value and are worth caring about, is less apparent. It now needs to be deliberately ingrained. As writer Wendell Berry puts it, if we could think locally, we could do far better than we are doing now. The right local questions and answers will be the right global ones. You can't act locally by thinking globally. If you want to keep your local acts from destroying the globe, you must think locally. It needs to be deliberately ingrained in the way we teach and talk about our lives as citizens of America. If we don't teach our kids why the places they inhabit matter, the message they get is most of those places, especially in rural areas and among our smaller cities, are throwaway places and a pass-through that more ambitious people leave. This is what we're up against. Commercialism, consumerism, and globalism are not friends to small places, local places, indigenous industries, or things worth preserving and cherishing. Writer James Howard Kunstler describes these asteroid belts of architectural garbage as places nobody wants to be in, and cites the immersive ugliness of our everyday environments, suggesting that we can't overestimate the amount of despair we've generated with places like this, places not worth caring about. One of his favorite targets is Boston City Hall Plaza, a place so dismal, he describes, that winos don't even want to be there, a despotic building that wants us to feel like termites. Not to dwell on the negatives, but isn't the cult of celebrity a waste and a distraction? This enormous allocation of time and resources, fixating on imperial personalities that have no bearing and no relevance to the places where we live or the people we know and care about. It almost seems like a cry for help. We hardly need to be reminded to think globally. It's bombarded at us constantly. James Kunstler also observes that the villains really are these multinational corporations whose very survival is predicated on destroying local economies and thus local communities. It's not going to go away, and there are advantages to some of this global economic development, but it's something to be conscious of, and something that if we want to preserve our communities and make them whole and attractive and engaging, we need to find alternative strategies. That alternative strategy is really to imbue our communities with a sense of localism and local thinking. Think local, act local, preserve the things that give our localities distinction and identity. This again is why I regard community-based historical organizations and libraries with distinctive archival materials as kind of miracles of localism, sort of repositories of local content and knowledge, and a good jumping off point for building, rebuilding, and rekindling a sense of place, past, and community. No two of these local institutions are the same, and while some are clearly better and have more than others, they all share in common the mission to preserve and present local content, local material, archival material like this. Historic maps, bird's eye views, and other documentation for our built environments. Photographs documenting local industries. Photographs and memorabilia documenting the days of our lives. And the diversity of our ethnic heritage. Then there are preservationists and activists who get out there and help us understand and interpret our built environment. And what an extraordinary legacy these built environments are. They have so much to teach us about our past, our culture, our civilization. I always look at buildings as kind of representing the triumph of aspiration over inertia. Anything that gets built speaks to its time, place, and moment. Look at these treasures. And what glorious public buildings and houses of worship have been left to us by the past. James Kunstler argues that we create sense of place through places that are meaningful, places of quality and character. Good public buildings are meant to inform us of who we are and what we aspire to. They are the dwelling place of our civic life and the physical manifestation of a common good. And our monuments, public sculpture, and statuary. Even our small towns often have aspirational monuments that tell us who we are and report the journey that we've been on. Of course, the natural environment is the foundation of our sense of place. The geography, geology, topography, mountains, streams, lakes and rivers, wildlife and fauna, these all have the potential to enliven our imaginations and deepen our sense of civic attachment. Our public parks are both man-made and natural. These are pictures of Hartford, Connecticut's park system, which is one of the largest for a city its size in the country. Our beautiful rural cemeteries contribute to that natural environment. They always refer to them as one-stop shopping for art, history, and nature. Beautiful learning environments. So the antidote, once again, is to think local, buy local, foster local habits, and encourage local industries. While place is rarely the singular feature of museums and their missions, many do exhibits and have collections that they present that advance a argument about a place. This was the Connecticut River exhibit at the Wadsworth Atheneum in the 1980s that looked at hundreds of artifacts in the material culture and backstory of a place and time. At the Mattituck Museum in Waterbury, Connecticut is a installation titled Coming Home, Building Community in a Changing World, a veritable machine for manufacturing citizenship. It tells the story of the place in a multi-dimensional, object-oriented, interactive way. It is thrilling and kind of the cutting edge of what museums can do. And this exhibition at the Concord Museum, which used Henry David Thoreau's diaries as a benchmark for measuring climate change and engaging people with an examination of their physical environment and what's happening to it through various changes in our climate. Okay, so what's the value proposition here? What's the opportunity? I'm not an education reform theorist, and there are probably no easy answers. What we do know is that the United States spends more on education than any nation on earth and yet lags many in measurable outcomes. Ironically, where we lag most is in educating our free society for the responsibilities of citizenship and self-government. Teachers are increasingly required to teach to the test, and since astonishingly we no longer test in civics, social studies, or history, guess what gets less class time and attention? It's not funny. If an enemy combatant wished to undermine this country from within, they couldn't do a more effective job than we have done as a matter of public policy by diminishing teaching of history and civics. And I am prepared to argue that the aspects of history and social studies that matter most is local. One of the problems with history traditionally is that it was, sort of taught as a memorization game of facts and figures, focusing on, politicians and generals and wars and events, when really the most effective way to engage people with social studies and history is to start local, start with things that they already know and connect with, and build up from there. We don't need to revisit the expansive rhetoric about civic virtue and the necessity of an educated and engaged citizenry as outlined by the Founding Fathers, but just to quote James Madison, he asks about, is there no virtue among us? If there be not, we are in a wretched situation. To suppose that any form of government will secure liberty or happiness without virtue in the people is a chimerical idea. Well, that's true enough, and I think this is the challenge ahead of us. We talk about the American dream as a kind of a consumer achievement, but really, on the most basic level, the American dream is that we will strive increasingly to quicken the public sense of civic duty and transmit our inheritance of this nation, not only less, but greater and more beautiful than it was transmitted to us. What's not to love about that idea? I don't know, maybe social media will pick up the slack where the declining readership of newspapers has left us, but I'm not so sure. I think that this idea of an educated citizenry, of people engaged with local issues and national issues and educating themselves to be effective and informed voters and participants, it matters. And we're going to argue here that it really starts with a sense of civic attachment. I look back to the progressive era around 1900 as a kind of a golden age for education reform. You know, this was the period when pedagogy and the concepts of modern education were taking root. And sometimes these pioneers were grappling with things that really are worth revisiting. John Dewey is an iconic figure in American education. He wrote, among other things, that conflict is the gadfly of thought. It stirs us to observation and memory. It instigates to invention. It shocks us out of sleep-like passivity and sets us at noting and contriving. What a great concept that is. And, the idea that every great advance in science has issued from a new audacity of imagination. Is the kind of rhetoric and ideas that could really be useful even today. One of my heroes, although he's not famous, is New Haven's George Dudley Seymour, who was actually granted an honorary degree from Yale University for his role in improving and enhancing town-gown relations. This guy was an attorney and an antiquarian and a preservationist, a pioneer in all of the above, also interested in urban parks and city planning, and he was a kind of a paragon of civic engagement. He became famous in his time in New Haven in Connecticut for his work in city planning, and one of his projects was actually to create a primer on local knowledge and local history for the schools. And he wrote in 1924 that I long ago came to the conclusion that we must educate the boys and girls of our public schools to do our real work of city planning. Work must be preceded by interest, and interest proceeds from knowledge and proper pride. When the great body of our citizens become interested in our city, then we shall have a city beautiful in the real sense. Given the billions being spent trying to find water on Mars and other causes, I think I agree with actor Richard Dreyfuss that we need to rekindle the civic spirit in this country, and his Dreyfuss Initiative is one of many evolving institutions that are addressing this issue. Ever since the Nation at Risk report in the 1980s, there's just been this constant drumbeat of educational reform, and I'm not going to comment, nor am I competent really to comment on how effective some of it has been. I think we have huge special interests that are standing up to change, but such as it is, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has invested in small school initiatives, and the idea that small schools sometimes are transformational, can be, is one of the ideas that's taken root. The service learning movement of the 1990s, this operated more at the level of college, but also in some high schools. It's a good idea. It's certainly important. It's a way of engaging students with their environment. Although I think here we are in the 21st century, so many of these young people are having trouble finding work. The idea of yet more volunteerism maybe isn't the whole point. Choice schools, magnet schools, public choice schools, KIPP schools, charter schools, it's kind of bewildering, but there is certainly the swirl of thought and effort to rekindle the power and effectiveness of our public schools. It hasn't been easy, and it's not going to be easy. One of the most influential figures of the past decade or so, Rhee, who was the head of the Washington, D.C. school system, and was making tremendous advances before she was ambushed by special interests and forced out of her job there. But she's continuing to soldier on in interesting ways. And again, the struggle to make our schools better will not be over anytime soon. Geoffrey Canada is an American social activist and educator. Since 1990, he's been president and CEO of the Harlem Children's Zone in New York, mission to increase high school and college graduation rates among poverty-stricken children and families in Harlem. It's worked. The Harlem Children's Zone was profiled in 2004 in a story in the New York Times Magazine, which described it as one of the biggest social experiments of our time, and it was prominently featured in Waiting for Superman, the Academy Award-winning film documentary on the state of American public education. Desiring to emulate the Harlem Children's Zone, President Barack Obama announced plans to replicate the model in 20 other cities across the nation. So how does place, past, and environment fit into this? One of the other trends in education, again going back to the 60s and early 70s, and epitomized by the Foxfire movement that emerged out of Georgia, is the use of environmental tools and resources in pedagogy and instruction. Because communities feel increasingly under siege, culturally and even economically, I think that the conditions that make place such a relevant factor in education matter more now than ever. I love this. This is from Nova Scotia in Canada, actually, but Joseph Howe was a nationalist and journalist and politician. He wrote that a wise nation preserves its records, gathers up its monuments, decorates the tombs of its illustrious dead, repairs its great public structures, and fosters national pride and love of country by perpetual references to the sacrifices and glories of the past. Again, what the history does is it fosters a sense of civic attachment. The power of local history is the promise of civic attachment, the pride of place that always improves and may actually be necessary to achieve an ethical, socially cooperative, productive engagement with something beyond oneself. In his book on place-based education, Connecting Classrooms and Communities, David Sobel notes that in an increasingly globalized world, there are often pressures for communities and regions to subordinate themselves to the dominant economic models and to devalue their local culture, cultural identity, traditions, and history in preference to flashily marketed homogeneity. Schools should play a central role in this process of propagating enlightened localism. Place-based education is a pedagogy of community. It involves inspiring stewardship and the revitalization of civic life. Place-based education uses local community environment as a starting point to teach concepts in language arts, mathematics, social studies, and other subjects across the curriculum. It emphasizes hands-on, real-world learning experiences. It recontextualizes education locally and makes education a preparation for citizenship. It ultimately also improves student achievement, critical thinking, and increased enthusiasm and engagement with learning. It seems like just a gift from heaven, and something that more communities should really undertake as maybe in the context of experimental magnet or charter school. Place-based or place-conscious education has often been the hallmark of great teachers. The Daughters of the American Revolution has a magazine they publish, American Spirit, that almost every issue profiles a teacher here, there, other places, who has broken out of the mainstream and found really creative ways of using history to engage students. And 9 times out of 10, it's using local resources. That's been the key that's made the difference. Place-based or place-conscious schools are still pretty experimental. There are many of them and more every year. One of the early institutions to adopt a place-based curriculum was Christ Church School in Virginia, which is borders a river, a major river, and they use the river as part of a environmental discovery program that also involves learning about the community's needs and history and geography. And it continues all through high school, this kind of interweaving of place and learning. Our History Matters is a cause that I'm involved in that seeks to promote teaching state and local history through experiential learning, material culture, and primary source material to again rekindle this sense that the key to making history relevant is starting at the bottom and working your way up, starting at the level of community and working your way up. As a resident of Connecticut, I can assure you we're sitting on a gold mine of cultural content. Connecticut's one of the smallest states, and some have described it as a microcosm, sort of the story of America writ small. And really, almost every chapter of the American experience left a layer of residue that you can access, sites you can visit, stories you can tell. And if we could find a way to bring students to this content or pull the content into the classroom using new media technology and other tools, then that could be really transformational both for learning and for that pride of place that is so indispensable to civic attachment. We now have a politician, State Senate Senator Don Williams, head of the Majority Leader of the State Senate, who really gets this, and why don't you have a listen to what he has to say.
Our emphasis was to look at the treasures that we have in this state and make sure that our children know about them. Make sure that it is part of our curriculum. Work towards the goal, because we can tell Connecticut's story by talking about the Revolutionary War and the Industrial Revolution and everything that's come since. That's part of Connecticut history. And when they learn that, they will appreciate what they drive by on the school bus every single day.
You know, there's a lot more we can do to analyze and, compile the numbers and information needed to make this case. But, it's often been said that people retain much more of what they experience than what they read. So experiential learning really matters. But this local dimension matters too. I mean, if you think about civic engagement as something that starts with curiosity, which leads to knowledge, which leads to understanding, which hopefully leads to a sense of responsibility and caring, and ultimately to engagement and action. It's where it starts. It starts with curiosity, and that often doesn't start at a global level. It starts with people kind of taking stock of and being interested in the things in their own backyards. Why does it matter? This is why it matters. Our children, the cliche goes, are certainly our future. And when I see happy, engaged, excited students on location, on field trips, and experiencing some of the wonders of our cultural heritage, I see little citizens in the making, and it makes me smile. Globalism may now be a fact of life, but as a mindset and point of view, it's just plain globaloney. Or as Georgia-based urbanist and downtown consultant Billy Parrish notes, think local, act local, and the whole global thing will work itself out. One truly needs to be from somewhere before we can aspire to be from everywhere. Global citizenship begins at home, and frankly, it doesn't matter where you're from or even if you move around. Civic attachment is a life skill. It's not inherited, it's rarely taught, and it is useful anywhere and everywhere your journey might take you. But if you fall in love with some place, by all means stay and express that affection in good work. How much more vividly the lessons of our country's past would come alive and be retained if they could be related to the people and places within easy access of our students. The sense of immediacy is inestimable value in bringing home the lessons of the past, the effects of the past upon the present, and the continuing relevance of history at all levels in the life of all of us. If I had a magic wand, rekindling that spirit would be the highest priority of our state and local education officials and politicians. America's journey of freedom is a gift and a joy to preserve and reflect upon. It's a work in progress that gets better to the degree we feel that civic attachment and desire to, how do the ancient Athenian statesmen put it, pass along our cherished places, not only less, but greater and more beautiful than they were left to us.